we are honored to welcome the founders of an innovative program based in Nanaimo, British Columbia, called Roots to Thrive. Recently, MAPS Canada began a partnership with Roots to Thrive to support their programs, which are delivering group-based psychedelic-assisted therapy. And we're going to hear from them about this amazing and groundbreaking program today. So we do encourage donations if you're in a position to give. And your support goes a long way in helping us work towards making psychedelics accessible and safe. MAPS Canada is a nonprofit charity that relies entirely on public donations to help us achieve our mission of expanding safe access of psychedelic medicines to all those in Canada. To learn more about MAPS Canada, you can visit our website, mapscanada.org. And Roots to Thrive aims to provide free or low-cost services to those who most need them, first responders, people at the end of life, and others experiencing trauma and mental health crises. Your donations tonight will support this program and allow people to have access to this treatment. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get going. If you're new to Crowdcast, there's a few things to note. On the right is a general chat where we can have conversations with other audience members. Below there's a Ask a Question panel. Upvoting is possible so that the most popular questions rise to the top. And just to let you know that episodes in this series will be recorded and available to watch again right here in Crowdcast. So if you miss an episode, you can still follow the invite link to view the replay. So in order that everyone can get the most out of this webinar, we're going to ensure that chat remains respectful and answer questions that are relevant to the topic of access to psychedelic medicine. So I'd like to welcome in our guests now. So MAPS Canada is proud to celebrate a partnership with the groundbreaking Roots to Thrive community of practice based in Nanaimo, and which works in partnership with the Coast Salish people of the Snuneymuxw First Nation and Vancouver Island University. And tonight we're going to talk about their innovative model, their programs, and the results being reported by patients, and the research and training that they're doing. And so I'm going to let them explain a bit more about what it is. So let me just introduce our guest tonight. And I just want to let you know we had a fourth guest, Lindsay Farrell, who is unable to attend tonight because of illness. And so we wish her well and hope that she gets better soon. So I'd like to start out by introducing Dr. Shannon Dames. Shannon spearheaded the development of the theoretical framework for Roots to Thrive. She serves at Vancouver Island University as a nursing professor and resilience researcher. As a byproduct of her doctoral work, which focused on the core factors that promote human flourishing, and as a health professional and investigator for the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, Dr. Dames is now spearheading the ongoing development and research components to Roots to Thrive, combined with medicine-assisted therapy. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Valerie Masuda. Valerie is a palliative care physician and general practitioner in oncology working in the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island, certified in psychedelic medicine through the California Institute of Integral Studies, trained through Therastil and the Roots to Thrive program. Dr. Masuda has been working in the psychedelic space since 2020, using psilocybin-assisted therapy for palliative patients, navigating the Section 56 exemptions and later the Special Access Program to support patients with distress secondary to their serious cancer diagnoses. And last but not least, we have Dr. Pamela Kriskow, who is a medical doctor with a strong interest in chronic pain, mental health, and psychedelic medicine. She's a clinical instructor at UBC, University of British Columbia, and adjunct professor at Vancouver Island University. She's the medical director of the VIU Postgraduate Certificate in Psychedelic Medicine, which I think you'll hear more about. And she is one of the founding board members of the Psychedelic Association of Canada, formerly the Canadian Psychedelic Association. Dr. Kriskow is actively involved in research related to psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, frontline healthcare workers and first responders' mental wellness. And she's also a co-investigator of the largest microdosing study, microdose.me, which is ongoing with 15,000 plus enrolled participants. And she is the medical lead on the Roots to Thrive ketamine and psilocybin-assisted therapy programs. So Shannon, Pam, Valerie, welcome. And it's really great to have you. And we're really excited about your work and partnering with Roots to Thrive. And so maybe I'll just turn it over to Shannon to give a bit of history of how you came up with this program and some of the background of what you're shooting for here.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. It's good to be here. I feel like I have a lot to say, and I'm going to try not to just go on and on here. So maybe we'll hit it in chunks. Just maybe to the beginning of Roots to Thrive, which feels like it was a really long time ago. By trade, I came into this work as a nurse. I've been a nurse for a couple decades now, and experienced burnout and a variety of other kind of mental health challenges within that time period. Very familiar with pretty trauma-laden childhood and work environment, and was really interested personally about resilience and how within an environment where we have a lot of self-help marketing coming at us, and it can be really difficult to understand like what is the basics, like the very, very basics of what enables some humans to go on to thriving while other humans seem to go into kind of states of disease or suffering. So I got into resilience research really for personal reasons. I got into the psychedelics also for personal reasons, which intertwines with research development as well. So in 2017, I really started looking at student nurses, actually is where I began. New graduate student nurses have some of the highest burnout rates of all the medical providers. So I really wanted to understand what the context was and why some seemed to be able to survive the same context that others were in, but while others were not doing well. So it really began the theory development of Roots to Thrive, which comes down to kind of two basic theoretical, research-informed concepts, and then built it from there. And I'm speaking like I did this on my own. This actually was a team of healthcare practitioners from the local health authority here, Vancouver Island University, spiritual healthcare providers, elders, coming together to really understand, like, how do we take what normally, where we might go to an 8-hour trauma-informed practice seminar where we're filling our minds with more and more information, but not necessarily really understanding it from the place of the body or enough to change our ways on the surface. So how do we do it differently? And that's really like that big question around how do we do this differently so that we actually see change on the surface, we feel more security in our bodies, which then would help us shed some of the mental health conditions that are a natural consequence of the culture, both the individualist culture that we live in and specifically the medical culture, which is highly competitive, individualist, and often leaves bodies that are in it lonely, afraid, and very much incongruent, meaning what we put out on the surface is often not aligned with who we really are in our very essence. And that little problem right there, the incongruence problem, is one of the theories under Roots to Thrive, is really looking at how do we show up in a more congruent way, which is one of the two components of how we thrive as humans. The other component that we really looked at it's called sense of coherence. And these are congruence is Carl Rogers, seminal theorist. Sense of coherence, Aaron Antonovsky, both research informed in the last century with a whole lot of data. And it's really about how do we find meaning, understanding, confidence, and predictability in life on the surface. And that is the difference between somebody that does very, very well in trauma-informed environments and somebody that tends to spiral into disease states. And when I say disease states, I mean both mental disease, dis-ease states, but also very closely linked to physical disease states. So the whole program is really about kind of getting to the very, very basics. So from 2017, it was in a program of research. We iterated, and it became a community of practice program. And what that means is that we came together to as facilitators in the process. There's a lot of background noise, and I don't know if I'm just hearing that, but anyway, I'll keep going. And with the idea that we as facilitators were also struggling on the surface. So we're very much patient partners in the process. So I say that as in, oh, that really helped. Thank you. So that's a big part of Roots to Thrive, is that we who are in the program, who are running the program, who are the experts of the program, are also actually practicing in the program with participants. So we're all patient partners in our own way. And this is kind of part of that idea of really working in a different system than this kind of individualist way that we've learned to survive in this current culture, is how do we come to a place where we feel a sense of belonging and connection and safety to show up as we are, even when we're really, really messy and we might have a couple of our wheels right off our bus. Like, how do we show up in that place? How do we create safe spaces? So the community of practice is really about practicing in a community environment with shared intentions and agreements, and learning how to embody these principles, which then we expand on the surface of our lives. So from that place, we also engaged Indigenous elders as well as part of this development process, knowing that us in the West, our Western ways of thinking, our individualist upbringing is part of what's making us sick across the board, physically and mentally, and that Indigenous ways of knowing are actually far more conducive to what the research is showing us humans need in order to flourish or in order to thrive. So we've been taking a two-eyed seeing approach as best we can, and we make plenty of mistakes, and we would, we're always trying to maximize the Indigenous ways of knowing. But the idea is that we take these two, the biomedical Western approach and the Indigenous ways of knowing, and we combine them to create a healing container that really works for all of us, whatever culture we come from, coming together as humans, as a bit of a reconciliation effort, actually. So from this place, as we're patient partners working in a community of practice environment, really honoring Indigenous ways of knowing, leading us out of our current mental health crisis with us rather neurotic individualist brains that have been conditioned here in the West. We started looking at other ways of working with very rigid ego systems, or rigid ego structures, I should say, that many of us have when you have been in a thinking mind for your whole life, where you've put almost all of your eggs in your brain basket, your cognitive basket. It creates a very deep ruts, very rigid ego structure, and a lot of fear to drop into our bodies. So in this way, psychedelics have been a huge a way that we can optimize and work with our rigid ego structures here in the West in order to really understand what it means, what it feels like to drop into our body, to connect to all that is, rather than just connecting from stories looping of the mind. So I'm going to pass this ball because I realize I've been talking for quite a while. So I think this is a good time to pass this to, and I'll maybe bridge this a little bit better. In 2020, we got a grant, Vancouver Island University and Island Health, to bring in ketamine-assisted therapy. It's a CIHR grant. We also got a provincial grant as well from the Michael Smith Foundation to start with ketamine-assisted therapy and to incubate program development to see what we could learn with all of the psychedelics, starting with ketamine. And to promote greater resilience, specifically working with healthcare providers first, because we knew they would have the loudest voices in terms of advocates and safety. So the first couple of years of the program was focused on healthcare providers. And I'm going to pass the baton to Pam, who was a huge part of the CAT part of RTT CAT. So off to you, Pam.
Thanks, Shannon. So I had the very fantastic luck of crossing paths with Shannon and her program. And at the time I did cross paths at that, I was doing, my practice was 100% chronic pain. And and we were doing really well with patients, but at that time I was having this real dilemma, that knowing that about 50% of the pain in some people's case was existential pain, was psychological pain, was depression pain, anxiety, their PTSD, and was starting to look at how to bring psychedelic assisted therapy into my practice with the psychologists I had on my team and the other therapists I had on my team, and really wanted to bring that in because there's no amount of interventional pain treatments that I could do to get people better. And when it's so much like related to PTSD or trauma or depression, etc. And so the luck of the world brought me crossing paths with Shannon, who had this program, and they were ready to put in the psychedelic assisted therapy element of that. And so we wrote the program, worked together, figured out how to create a psychedelic assisted therapy guideline protocol that could fit with the Roots to Thrive program. And started, as Shannon said, we started with ketamine being a legal psychedelic-like medicine, and wrote the protocol that way, but also wrote it widely, knowing that we would be bringing in other psychedelic medicines as a return to legality. And, it's been fantastic watching, being able to watch people get their lives back, watch doctors, nurses, therapists, social workers come through our program and get their lives back and get back out there in the world and do what they really love doing. And then I'll pass it on to Val, because then what happened is we had the opportunity to pivot again and add and expand the program and add psilocybin as we had intended, but in a way that we hadn't quite thought about. So I'll hand it to Val to let her talk about how we did that.
There we go. Thanks, Pam. So another one of those happy mergers where I happened to cross Pam and Shannon at the right time. I had been involved with a number of patients, which I was really struggling with pain and existential distress with. And I connected by chance with Bruce Tobin, who is the executive director of Therasil, which is a patient advocacy group looking at accessing psilocybin, particularly for patients with end-of-life distress. And I had one patient I was really struggling with, and as a last-ditch effort, I approached Bruce and I said, how can we get this person access to psilocybin? And luckily, Thomas Hartle had just a month before been the first patient in Canada to receive a Section 56 exemption for use of psilocybin for existential end-of-life distress. And so we put through a Section 56 exemption request to the health minister, which was Patty Hadju at the time, with support from our local MP, Alistair McGregor. And within 24 hours, we had the exemption. And 2 days later, we were able to give her a psilocybin treatment. And the change in that patient, where we went from a position of extreme distress, unable to relate to friends and family, completely fearful of dying, completely unmanaged pain, we took a 180-degree turn with one treatment, and her pain was manageable. She was able to reach out to her family and friends and really have a meaningful life for the short period of time after that. So for me, that was a huge game changer. And I supported about 4 patients after that time with Section 56 exemptions. And I wasn't really particularly happy with the fact that I had to, for the dyad model, which I felt I needed to administer the medicine under, I wasn't happy about having to look for underground therapists. And I really wanted a really above ground multidisciplinary approach to these patients, and happened upon Pam and Shannon's Roots to Thrive program, and went through the program myself to really understand this community practice, and just thought, okay, this is it. This is the way we can administer these the psychedelics, and just a really safe and consistent model. So we had 8 patients with the Section 56 exemption, and 1 patient who was waiting for an exemption, and we went through a process, I would say, which is a long story, but to cut it short, we had had a multidisciplinary team surrounding these patients. We were volunteering our time. We had volunteered spaces. We had donors that donated money towards our venue and insurance. And then all the practitioners donated their time. And we took these 9 patients, one of which received his exemption just hours before our group psilocybin administration. And we took them through an accelerated Roots to Thrive program of 6 weeks with really markedly positive results and some learnings from that. And so we took the suggestions of the participants and we incorporated it into a second cohort of patients. The first cohort we brought through in November 2021. And in January of 2022, the rules changed. So no longer were people receiving Section 56 exemptions for accessing psilocybin, and we had to move through the special access program. So we applied for 10 patients through the special access program. Unfortunately, 2 died before they were able to access the treatment. But we brought 8 patients successfully through our second cohort of patients with terminal illness, and again had really great positive results with this cohort of patients. So that's how we're incorporating the psilocybin into our Roots to Thrive curriculum, specifically directed for patients with terminal illness.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. Maybe I'll just follow up a little bit. So I'm sort of curious if you could dig a bit deeper into like what's the patient experience going through the program. I know people. It's a hybrid model of some online support. Like how many times are people getting together? How long does the program last? What's the in-person component like, when people finally meet each other in person for the first time, like those kinds of things. Would somebody want to talk a little bit more about that?
I can give it a start. I'm noticing some questions too, so maybe we'll hit them during this, or we can get them. The model, the way it is, and I think it's really important to note that we are in we're in a program of research, and then we're all novices in my humble opinion, in the world of psychedelics, and particularly us here in Canada. And so I think it's really, really important that we're always in a really tight learning system where we realize we've not arrived. We're making mistakes. There's a margin of error. We are new to this work. We are especially new in the biomedical system to this work. So there's a lot that we're learning, and we've been at this now for, I guess, really a number of years, and we're still making changes based on what we're hearing from the front line. So I really like to underscore that for anybody doing program development in this area. I think an ongoing iterative framework is imperative, and that we're sharing what we're learning so that we're not all making the same mistakes again and again and again, and that we're really maximizing safety and kind of the healing potentials out there on the front line, despite the silos that we all find ourselves in. It's really about trying to get the best treatment to Canadians, and maybe like sharing information, which isn't really part of our individualist culture. But in order to do this really well, I think it's really important. So on that note, I will share some information. So the Roots to Thrive program on the ketamine side, so there's actually 3 streams. We have a Roots to Thrive program where there's no medical adjuncts added to it at all. It is 100% virtual. We went virtual when COVID came, and we actually saw no, some people actually even prefer it because there's a lot of safety in people being in their homes doing this kind of vulnerable work. It's kind of in their space, in their nest. So we've kept that going, even though we could go back to in-person now. We've actually decided to keep it virtual for these reasons, and we've had some really great feedback. So it's a 12-week program in general for the RTT only side and the RTT CAT side. And the CAT is the ketamine-assisted therapy, added to the RTT framework, and they all travel together. So it's whether you're in an RTT program or you're RTT CAT, they're all in the same kind of vessel, traveling at the same time period. And we all even start out each kind of Tuesday night as a large group. So with that, it's a 2-hour session, and it starts with, and this is very much aligned with the resilience factors of sense of coherence. It's really important that people's brains, which are very rigid, we need to know, like, we have to have buy-in from the brain in order for us to be even willing to go into our bodies for all the vulnerable work. So we start out with like a 15-20 minute, we call it a coming to know, which is really a member of the team that is hopefully in an inspired way, sharing some information around kind of the science and Indigenous ways of knowing in there as well, around why we're doing this work, giving it the meaning making. Once that happens, we do a pause practice, which is really about a co-regulation, kind of working with co-regulation theories, where we all kind of like dial down into lower brainwave states to move into our bodies, which is a lot more conducive when you're working with a community of practice as opposed to doing it individually. So we do that all together. And then we go into a small group, and that's where the community of practice really begins, in small groups of 6 to 8 participants. And it is quite literally learning, like a toddler, relearning what it would mean, what it would look like for us to communicate what is happening in our body, physically, emotionally. We often have a question that kind of elicits what is the emotion in our bodies, and then we share, we practice, and it is often a very awkward process for those of us that live above the neck. So it really is a relearning, and we do it every week, over and over and over again. We practice seeing each other for who we are, rather than the display that we're putting on the surface. So there's, within that seeing, there's a very structured process. And we also include it's a compassionate witnessing process, where we also communicate from like a somatic place how the share is impacting the other members of the group. So it's a process of relearning how to communicate from a very authentic, safe place. Before all this happens, because as you can imagine, especially those of us that have had many, many years of trauma and have armored up like nobody's business, we do a very tight intentions and agreement process, where we ensure every single member of the group has a say in how that group goes, and the agreements that are there, like right down to the, what time they show up, what happens when they miss a meeting, use of substances for the meetings, like the whole thing, so that there's buy-in and a sense of safety for this kind of de-armoring process that happens over the 12 weeks. The ketamine portion, for those that are in the CAT as well, happens on the weekends. So there's like an evening and the night where we do the community practice sessions, and then we do 3 ketamine sessions on the weekend. And what that is the deepening, right? So if you can imagine, many of us have a really hard time, even with listening to meditations, working with substances, whatever, staying in our body, because the mind is constantly pulling us to the surface. The nervous system does not want us to go in. All of our hypervigilant threat radars tend to run our life. So the CAT session, what it does is it allows people to sit in their bodies, right down into the basements that they generally fear going, for a couple hours, right? And they're doing this in a group. So we quite literally have mats on a floor in a circle. And they are administered the ketamine all in a group setting, and they all journey together in the safe vessel that they have established over the 4 weeks leading up to that. So by the time they see each other, they all know each other. There's an established sense of safety. We've kind of worked with how much it takes to get to that place so that they can do this in a safe way. Every member is very, in order to promote agency, which we are also often lacking in the society. We really encourage, each participant goes around and names their boundaries, what their body needs, their support needs, all of that, in front of kind of a field of witnesses in their group member. So what it is that we are practicing learning how to be in community, how to really allow the felt sense of community to drop into the body. And these ketamine sessions are like an amplifier. They amplify what we're working on week to week. And they enable people to sit in their bodies, which can be a bit terrifying when we're afraid of what's in there, like in the basement, the place that we never go. Well, when you go and sit in your basement and you realize, and then you get to the other side of it and you realize it's actually not that scary down there, or it was, and you released a whole bunch, but you now have the confidence to know you can go down there, you can visit, right? So there's a lot of empowering people that have been very afraid to kind of go below the neck in those sessions. And I feel like I'm talking for a long time now, so I'm going to wrap this baby up. So over the 12 weeks, I would say that it's just a deepening process and practicing new ways of being, where then these people, all of us, then take these ways of being into our everyday lives at work, in our homes, et cetera. And we practice the same authenticity, learning how to show up, having more awareness of what's going on in our body, allowing ourselves to express. Like, can you imagine if we actually emotionally expressed spontaneously, and really understanding what it would mean to have relationships on the surface that allowed you to feel safe to do that, and starting to cultivate those relationships. I'm going to leave it there and pass it to Pam or Val if you guys want to fill in any gaps.
Yeah. Thanks, Shannon. You raised some anxiety in me because I grew up in a big house that had a very scary unfinished basement.
I know that basement.
Afraid to go down into. Yeah. Yep. Still creepy down there. I guess maybe is it Valerie? Are you able to sort of put the similarities and differences between the ketamine program and the psilocybin program? Maybe just, I know it's a little shorter.
So, the psilocybin program, the reason why we're using patients with terminal illness is because those were the only patients that were actually given Section 56 exemptions. And as we go forward with the special access program, these are the same patients that are given access to psilocybin. So it's really about access. There, in 2015 and 16, there are a lot of studies out of the States showing incredible use of psilocybin with people with existential distress. And these are people, who are either very afraid of the process of dying and losing capacity and becoming more dependent on people and losing their sense of identity, to people who just are so fearful of dying. Like the idea that they are going to be here and gone is something they just absolutely cannot process, and it just prevents them from actually enjoying and living the rest of their life when they have a very short period of time to look forward to the rest of their life. So we thought originally we would do an accelerated Roots to Thrive program, and we would do a 6-week program where we do 3 weeks of coming to knows and getting in our bodies, and in this group sessions on Zoom, we would meet in person for one psilocybin session on the weekend. And this is an 8-hour session, so people are really deep in their bodies in that basement for a long period of time. And then coming out of it, sharing in the group, and then they have some 4 to 5 integration sessions out after that. So it does follow sort of that model in the studies of 3 sessions before, preparatory, a psychedelic session, and 3 to 5 sessions afterwards. And the participants themselves felt, one, that we were kind of skirting around the whole death and dying thing a little bit, and they said we want to go there. We want to go there right now. And so we changed the curriculum to reflect that. They also said that 6 weeks was way too short, and so we increased the length of the program to 4 weeks, then the psilocybin, and then 4 weeks of integration afterwards. And the difference in the 2 groups, where for cohort 2, where the first night we get right deep into, this is me, I have stage 4X, and I'm a mom, and I have these many kids, or I'm contemplating MAID, or I'm spending all my time drinking, or that was like day 1. And these guys, they got that they were all in a group of people that kind of were there too. And when you have cancer and you're dying, there ain't no one around you that's doing that. And you have this sense of super isolation, and your friends and family kind of expect you to put on the great face, get on with life, don't get me down kind of thing, or abandon you completely. So these people have extreme isolation. And in that group, it was unbelievable how they came together and supported each other. And in our sessions, the facilitators, we would just sort of say, here's the prompt, and we would sit back and watch them just blossom and hold each other and cry together. It was just so absolutely amazing. When they came together in the psilocybin sit, it was like they were old friends, and they were seeing each other in the first time, and it was so neat. And then they felt so together for the sit. So even now, after a cohort has ended and they've had such phenomenal changes, each one had such phenomenal changes that they've continued to connect with each other, even in person, and it's been really, really beautiful to see.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, and I think just having that environment where really like being able to discuss your terminal illness in a very like honest and vulnerable place with people who understand exactly what you're talking about, and with the aid of the medicine, it's just a really amazing and wonderful experience. It sounds. So I mean, you brought up MAID. So medical aid, and I forgot the acronym, but it's
medical assistance in dying.
Yeah, you don't think the "in" would be one of the letters, but I guess they needed it. But it's basically that's now a right that we have in Canada, that you can get medical assistance to dying, and yet we're often scrambling still to have access to the psychedelic therapies that would maybe like have you come to some peace with your situation and choose not to die, or to to live your days. So I'm yeah, and I mean, obviously I think probably everybody on this webinar would agree that that's a bit of an unjust situation and stuff, but this is so this webinar is a bit about sort of some of the access issues. And I'm wondering if maybe you want to talk a bit about sort of the process that we're now in with these special access program applications. And I think very few of those have been approved in Canada to date. So it doesn't really seem like a doorway as much as a crack in something, very small crack. So I'm wondering if you want to speak to some of your experience with that, Valerie.
Sure. Like, when a patient put in an application for Section 56 exemption, it was a person who was, basically bearing their soul, all their medical information to a politician or, a clerk in the exemptions office, and pleading for compassionate access. And it was so, you would see patients get access, you'd see some patients not get it. It was very inconsistent who actually was approved and wasn't approved. It just seemed to be like if somebody's having a good day or not a good day, depending on who was approved. And I had many patients who died waiting for Section 56 exemption with a lot of existential distress and suffering. And when we talk about this level of suffering, it is a really deep, horrible suffering that impacts not only the patient, but everyone around them. When we have the new SAP, we're looking at now a physician advocating for patient access. So again, it's a little bit better in that the physician now is applying for access on behalf of the patient, but we are still in a position where the physician now has to bear all of the patient's, medical information and personal information and all the things they've tried and failed and why they think they should have access. So again, it's a bargaining, this thing back and forth with Health Canada, and Health Canada is trying to do their best, but they have very limited understanding about the process. And as they are flooded with SAP applications, I'm hearing about people who are rejected, who then go on because they're not palliative enough or they haven't tried enough, that go on and die waiting for access. I've heard of people that are absolutely denied access because diseases like Huntington's or ALS isn't considered a palliative diagnosis, but of course it is a palliative diagnosis. So there's this big disconnect about people looking for access, physicians and patients, and the bureaucracy behind that. So it is still a problem. And I'll pass that on to Pam.
Yeah, well explained, Val. Yeah, and the challenge, I just want to iterate again on this, is that the challenge is usually, as physicians or nurses, the decision on a medical is between the patient and the physicians. You know, what is the best treatment? What is the best therapy for this person, this complex person right in front of us? And there's already adequate data coming previously to even our data coming out of Johns Hopkins and NYU that's showing that psilocybin is a great medicine to help people that want access to it with existential distress. That's been proven. It's not deniable. It's not debatable. Our program
and relatively
incredibly
low
low
risk.
You know, it's this breakthrough status for the FDA at a no known toxic dose. You cannot eat enough mushrooms to kill yourself. You just cannot consume enough. I mean, it's one of the safest things out there in terms of the results that we get from it. And so, and you know, at this point, really, the preponderance of evidence is so strong that it's really hard to deny that. And it seems to me that if, and I think we all agree, is that if our patients have access to MAID, if you have the right to die, you certainly should have the right to a mushroom that will help you enjoy your life. So I think that we could say that this is proven well beyond anything that we should need to do anymore, and we should not be needing to do any more clinical trials. I think that's an ethical waste of money when there's so much other research that needs to happen. And we already had research. We had thousands of clinical trials prior to the war on drugs that, you know, had evidence for psilocybin for alcoholism, psilocybin for other substance use disorders, psilocybin for depression. It's not like we're just brand new to this. It's, you know, Westernly we're kind of brand new, but really not that brand new from the 1900s. And we're certainly not brand new to this if we look at our indigenous roots across this planet.
Absolutely. Did you want to jump in, Val?
Yeah, I just want to jump in about the medical assistance dying piece. In 2023, we will have access to medical assistance in dying for the treatment of chronic mental illness. And I feel that, you know, this is a very scary piece for me. I'm a MAID assessor, and certainly when patients come to me for MAID assessment, for medical assistance in dying, there are many reasons people come to me. They have a terminal illness, and it's all about a patient's perception of a good death, really. We talk about medical assistance in dying for chronic mental illness, where we have a very complex situation where, you know, chronic mental illness is not only informed by the person, their past trauma, their ongoing trauma, but, you know, their access to safe housing, you know, substance abuse, poverty, disability, unemployment. There are so many social determinants of health that are factored into chronic mental illness that I really fear that people will be accessing medical assistance in dying because they're unable to access basic social determinants of health. As well as, you know, we have people with very deep trauma, and we know that, you know, this informs their behavior and informs their thought pattern, and we have psychedelics that potentially can change all that in the right context and framework and treatment program. And yet we are struggling with 25% of Canadians being diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and we're dealing with an opioid crisis where thousands of young people are dying every year from opioid overdose. So, you know, and nothing's being really done about this. And yet psychedelics could be a game changer in all this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for giving us that context, Val. I'd like to remind people that you can put questions in, and we're going to ask our wonderful guests here to respond to them. And so I want to jump to the first one. And the first question is, Pam, you brought up sort of the science and the research and evaluation. And so just turning it back onto this program being an innovative program, how do we evaluate the outcomes of treatment in this context, given how dynamic and innovative it is, and including that it's also like continually evolving and changing over time as you're getting feedback from patients and learning yourselves a bit about how to do things better. So do you just focus on individuals' self-reported symptoms or how they function, or how does the research work around this program? And can you also answer, I know the ketamine assisted therapy has been around a little bit longer and there's been more research. So I'm wondering if you could also share a bit of like what you've learned, like what the research has shown.
Right. Well, Shannon's our head researcher on the team, so I'll let her dive into like the data deeply. But we're doing something quite interesting here. So we could be doing this completely in an academic setting, but the reality, and Val and I know this well, that many of our patients would never qualify for any of these studies. In fact, John Hopkins went through hundreds and hundreds of people before they were able to even get their few that came into their study. Same with the MAPS MDMA trials, they say the same sort of things. And I think we have a very pragmatic approach here, is that we are offering the program in the community with community physicians, community nurses, community researchers, our therapists, and Indigenous elders, where most of healthcare, where most of palliative care, where most of substance use treatment happens. And that's what we need, is we really need to be studying and researching in the real world, where real patients are actually getting the treatment. Many times the clinical trials that are out there, my patients wouldn't be eligible for it, yet I have to use those same clinical trials to make a clinical decision for my patient. And so we're really doing something quite unique here, is we're studying what we are doing with all of its not perfect lineage of a placebo arm, an active treatment arm, et cetera, and studying our results and getting them out to the world and iterating on that, really taking patient-oriented research very seriously in the fact that we are always listening to the patients that go through our program and how do we make this better. And one of the things to remember for people that are relatively new to this is that the models that are out there are just models. The John Hopkins model, the MAPS dyad model, these are just models, and they're models that are easy to study. And so what we're also researching, and is really important for groups like this, where we are so multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, all working together, is that we're going to be able to study different innovative models that are working and iterate on those innovations and find out what's better. The health implementation gap right now is 17 years. That means 17 years from the day we know something works to the day it actually trickles down to where your healthcare provider can usually use it. And that's not good enough for us. We're not happy with that, so we're doing it right now. So our health innovation is like literally days, weeks. If a patient says this could be better done this way, and we can do that, we do that. So it's a different way of looking, and we really do need this research to be done the way our program is doing, which is often retrospective chart reviews. Some of it's prospective, and we just keep looking at how can we make this better? How can we really serve our patients first and foremost? But I'll hand this over to Shannon, and Shannon can talk about our frontiers of psychiatry and our data on this.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. And I think just to reiterate, I think one of the questions around the difference between ketamine and psilocybin, and this is, I think, impossible, honestly, to answer. There's so many ways you could answer this question. And again, we are all still really learning a lot as we go. What we found with ketamine, as it's funny, we started with ketamine as it's kind of low hanging fruit. It's the one we can start with. It's one we will learn with. And we found over time that ketamine is actually a pretty amazing psychedelic medicine. It's quite predictable, like start and stop times and everything in between. It is really conducive to creating a group environment that has some pretty tight and part of sense of coherence, which is one of those resilience factors I spoke about earlier, is predictability. So ketamine is pretty fantastic in that way, just even in people being able to trust what is going to happen. And once they kind of get a sense of ketamine and the journey, there's a lot more kind of agency and confidence to really go in. Usually by the time people are in even sit 2, they're like, I am ready. And by sit 3, they're like, I am so ready. So there's a lot of excitement. Because it does have a bit of a predictable pathway. That being said, the body is kind of the body is the healer, right? It's the set and setting helps us get into our body so that it can do its work. And the body does what it needs to do in order to heal. And so, there's a lot of surrender to whatever that looks like. Psilocybin is not as predictable in terms of like how it might show up in individuals, and even in terms of dosing, and especially when there's a whole lot of different medical conditions going on as well. So, but it's more serotonergic. There's some real benefits as well, even in terms of, working with trauma. It has a totally different mechanism in how people experience even connection in the world, right? And these two medicines are both really, you can get to that space because once you're in your body and you feel your heart space, through your heart space, you feel the world, right? So any psychedelic that can get you into your body so that you can really sit in your heart space, which and then, you feel into the spirit world and all of that, you can get a very similar response. But the predictability between those two medicines, I think we have a lot of learning in the Western model with psilocybin and how to really work with predictable environments in that way. In terms of the research, I think ketamine, we've had exceptional results. It's, the latest, so the Frontiers study, which I'll get a link there when I'm not speaking, it speaks to some of the exceptional results that we've seen. And really since day one, we were totally shocked when even we started this with the CIHR grant at the high percentage of PTSD, like complete, came in PTSD positive, left PTSD negative, like over 90%, anxiety, depression, like the whole gamut. And really, I just like to remind people too that like in the Western system, we focus on these labels because we live on the surface and we're always trying to, understand from the space of the brain. So we label things in a very superficial way based on the symptoms that are showing up on the surface. But really what's happening in the basements of our bodies is like all of these things that show up on the surface are really not all of them. There are some outliers, but most of them are coming from a place of deep disconnection, loneliness, and insecurity, right? So when these medicines and these communities of practice, it's not the medicine that creates the sense of belonging and security in the world. It's actually the community of practice. It doesn't mean it has to be Roots to Thrive. It's about establishing a sense of community in a way that we've never felt. Right, our culture has actually never allowed us. We're not built that way to develop a sense of collective security. Once that is felt in the body, not like understood up here, that doesn't work. We've tried that. It has to be actually felt in the body. These symptoms on the surface, these labels that we all focus on, they start to just disappear, and it is amazing to watch these people that are unhealable. I've tried everything. I'm one of these people that came to this work that are like, not me, it doesn't work for me. And then, and again, it's not because they took a pill or got a shot or anything like that. It's because they start to believe that they are indeed a beautiful, worthy, connected human in a very deep place. And from that sense of belief and confidence in the world, they navigate the surface of life through an entirely different lens. And it really changes everything. So we could niggle about like, which psychedelic works better for what, and I'm not even sure all of that is that important. I think what's really important is the process that they're all getting us to. And there's a variety depending on what people are really working with and where that's coming from. The different medicines definitely can be catered to individuals. But in the end, it's not so much about the psychedelic. It's actually about the program and the community building. So I'm actually trying to address that second question as well. The reason we believe that group therapy is so powerful is because in a dyad model where you have two paid, if we're looking at a healthcare system, two paid facilitators staring at one patient, there's a couple things going on. There's performance anxiety, right? So the person that's being stared at is kind of feeling like, oh, I need to, especially if there's, volunteers and they're wanting to make this feel worthwhile. And it's really tricky to stay in the body when the mind is doing this kind of hypervigilant tending to what's happening on the surface. There's a condition there too, right? So a lot of the program in the community of practice it's developed with unconditional positive regard as that is the medicine to believe you are unconditionally positively regarded in relationship to another. That is what heals us. It's a deep sense of connection and safety. And when you are paying somebody to be there for you, that is a condition, right? So it is actually really hard, I think, for people in a dyad kind of model to really feel unconditionally positively regarded when they're paying somebody to do their therapy. So the group model, you've got these peer members holding each other by choice. And we work really hard to remove those conditions so that when they test those relational containers, they actually start to not just know what unconditional positive regard is, but they start to believe it, because they've shown up in a variety of ways, often not so pretty, plenty of messy, and they still feel a sense of love and belonging. And that is where the group model is it's magic, right? Like, people start to understand what it means to live in a more collective kind of culture, and how that really is the bedrock of how we gain resilience as humans. It is not by going and paying for services and, talking from the space up here. It's about feeling that sense of community in the body. So, okay, I'm going to stop there.
That's amazing. I really want to read the book when you publish it, Shannon. So, like, I feel like we all need to read that. There's not a book yet.
There's a book coming.
Maybe there will be.
Got a book deal for her. Don't worry. Can I kind of jump on that on two levels, Scott, if you don't mind? So one thing,
please.
Many of us came to this from the one-on-one dyad model. And in what we see in the ketamine work is just phenomenal. I would never go back, except in very small circumstances, to that dyad one-on-one work, just because the healing in group with the psychedelic assisted therapy as well is amplified and sped up, and people come away connected with friends, knowing what love is, knowing how to express their emotions, having widened their windows of tolerance, and all of that, and happening in such an accelerated way. It's not uncommon for us to hear feedback from the participants in the program saying, I got more in the last 4 weeks than I've gotten in 2 years with my therapist. That's basically 8 hours online with strangers who they've starting to become friends with, and then there's their ketamine-assisted therapy session with that group, and the feedback and the growth that is happening so fast. It is thrilling. It's why you go into medicine. These are kind of the results why you go into medicine. And then I had the privilege of some of our participants that went through this, who have gone through our psilocybin program, asking them some of them had the opportunity to have one-on-ones, like one-on-one sessions versus a group. And every one of them said, I really adore my therapist. They're really, really great. They did a great job. And the group was way better. It was way better because I was with, for everything that Val said earlier, I'm with people that understand where I'm coming from. I can really open up. I can bare my soul. I have community. I have friends. And, it's really filling that need that we need. That is love and connection and community is so healing. And, we have a kind of a saying in our program, come for the psychedelics, but stay for the community. And it's really true.
And I had one patient who said, I've had a couple of psilocybin one-on-ones, and they helped me, but this group session helped heal me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I think largely, as a species, humans are social, and I don't know if many people have read Johann Hari's latest book, Lost Connections, but it's the story is that we've sort of structured our lives around removing human connections in different forms that give meaning, and so it's not surprising to me to hear. That people really benefit more from a group approach, and that social part of that is such an important component to healing and to their own growth. And I think also that's reflected in a lot of people seeking, using psychedelics on their own, are seeking out group environments or other types of environments with other people to experience the psychedelics, which help to make those experiences more meaningful for them. So, and I guess I'll jump on. You didn't mention the economics of it, but I imagine maybe not specifically in a new program that's sort of figuring out where it's going, but I think if we can imagine a healthcare model, like it seems more efficient to have group-based types of things rather than having a therapist and one-on-one as well. So I don't know if anybody's done any cost benefit type of calculation around that or does anybody know about that? Or
we're working on it. We have we have a health economist looking at it. But when we look, my back of the napkin calculations based on what we know somebody with depression costs the healthcare system, what somebody with PTSD costs the healthcare system, et cetera, and some of the people that are coming through our program, firefighters, police officers, we know the cost of their salary when they're off on long-term disability. We know that. And if they go back to work, that is a cost savings right away. So I think I'm going to be super conservative here, but I think the cost savings to the healthcare system of everyone that goes through our program is at a minimum $30,000 in savings.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think we're going to see numbers a lot higher than that as we start calculating the numbers. And we know MAPS MDMA has already calculated these numbers, right? And they have seen the quality of life is enormous. It doesn't take many years to have that benefit come back. And the nice thing about access for our program is I think the MAPS break-even point for the MDMA, which is similar. They have multiple ones. They have really good work ahead of time, set and setting, very good integration. Their break-even cost is around $12,000 US to $20,000 US. They expect the insurers in the US will pay $20,000 US because it is such a cost savings at that price. And our program comes in for the ketamine-assisted therapy comes in at under $6,000 Canadian, which is significantly lower. And as we mentioned earlier on with the psilocybin, we provide that therapy completely for free to the patients. And we run on donations, and most of us have donated the majority of our time to make those programs happen because they're necessary. And this is where we really need policymakers to hear us. They're asking for solutions to the mental health crisis. They're asking for solutions for the substance use epidemic. And here we are. We're getting the results. We're right here. It is enormously beneficial, this program.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks so much for all your work on this and the work of your team. I know, so there's actually quite a few people in the Roots to Thrive team who do this work and form the backbone of your program. So what are I know you'd mentioned in the chat a bit about some of the cost and the that's not funded through the healthcare system. What are some of the other barriers that are faced by people in getting into this program or being able to participate in it? Obviously, with the psilocybin treatment, you need to have end of life or life-threatening conditions. So that definitely excludes people who are experiencing some other things that would potentially be benefit from psilocybin-assisted therapy. But what other kinds of benefit or barriers are there?
Well, I'll start. Maybe you guys can jump in. I think a lot of if we look at the kind of special access programs, and I would like to put a little pin in one of the kind of cultural challenges with special access program, but it is really a bit of a who you know. It requires a lot of volunteer time, even to just get in the door to get access to this from MDs that are very, very, very busy. So, and just even culturally, that is a real problem as well, because most of these MDs that even have their finger on the pulse are deeply seated in a biomedical system. So clients that have the resources and connections and relationships to access those unique physicians that can do all that work for them, as you can imagine, it is a massive barrier in order for people to get care in a timely fashion. There are advocacy agencies that work to try and I think minimize that as much as possible, but it really is unfair, I think I'll say, as somebody who's not an MD, to expect MDs to carry this and to like move this forward in the way that we are. And not only that, but we're also handing the keys to the castle in a very big way to the biomedical system, not even paying attention to other cultures that may not even really believe in kind of the primary mechanisms of that biomedical system, but may very much believe in the power of medicine-assisted therapies. So I think that is a really big one. We, as somebody who's been working at this for a few years now, academic grant writing is like writing a book. It is like each academic grant is pretty much, I have written a book, I've written a few of them, and it is not that different. It's a huge competitive process, and the chance of winning is very, very small. So it's like you're buying a ticket to the lottery and spending a lot of evenings, weekends, etc., trying to get these grants, and we're all fighting each other for very limited funds. So grant funds, yes, that opens up access, and it's limited, it's time, and you know, there are many times when I'm like, I'm done writing grants. It is such a terrible use of time, and especially considering the hoops that we are made to jump over. So that's one problem. The other problem is we have a public healthcare system that, like Pam says, wants to be innovative. They need to be innovative, but the way it's built, and this is, you know, no fault of the individuals in it, is there are so many layers, so many bureaucratic layers, which I think we're there for safety and checks and balances, but it really prevents us from doing iterative, innovative programming, because to make any kind of program changes, speaking from experience for doing this in a university with a health authority for the last few years, it is a huge process. So if we want to have innovative, iterative programs, we actually have to tighten the decision-making capacity within these kind of very layered bureaucratic institutions. So it's like it's working against our ability to be safe and innovative at the same time, because safety comes with the iterations that need to be made. So that's one piece. And the healthcare system is a bit terrified of taking this on until it is really, really tight, because I think in some ways, there's an inherent knowing that whatever they absorb is going to be really hard to change once they absorb it, right? So it's almost challenged us, and that's why we are doing this in a nonprofit right now, because it is a nimble structure that allows us to like maximize healing potentials based on what we're learning and minimize harms, because we're iterating so much to prevent any kind of potential safety issues. But it's a huge challenge, right? So we kind of look at it like, all right, the nonprofit world, we may have to build this and to get it to a place where the system feels like they can open their doors to it. And we're not really there yet. And we are constantly knocking on the door of the system to say like, yeah, it'd be really great if you could help us fund this. That being said, the ministry, we have received funds and support from these. So I don't want to make it seem like they're not. It's just not ongoing. So there's a huge access issue in that way. This is a have and have nots program until the public healthcare system opens their doors, or until the Ministry of Health, which funds those public health systems, starts to recognize innovative programming as adequate funding bodies in order to kind of serve in a more equitable way. Currently, the nonprofit, it's $5,850 in order to go through a 12-week program with ketamine-assisted therapy. It's pretty high. Like it's a price tag for a lot of people that are struggling financially month to month. That it is just not realistic. That number we have gotten down as low as possible with having like the safest structure possible. We do have a number of providers from different disciplines. And including, Indigenous elders and whatnot, so that we can make this container as optimal as possible, so that when people come in, they do actually have a healing experience. And cutting corners is just an option we just don't feel will provide the safety that we need. So I think when people compare the dyad model with the group model, we also have to take that into consideration. The dyad model doesn't have all of these lenses on it. We're not really honoring multiple ways of knowing. It tends to be a pretty narrow path. So even though the cost, I think we're still more affordable than the dyad model in many ways, it can be pretty close, because we do have a really robust structure that, keeps people safe and honors multiple ways of knowing, so that, everyone is kind of welcome and can have a positive experience in the container. I feel like I talked circles around this, but I hope that helped.
There's another element of that too,
Yes.
that I touched on earlier that is really important, is that this innovation, and you have a group like our group, like we're about 45 healthcare professionals on the team, if not more. And when you have this kind of innovation and this kind of safety and efficacy, this has to happen in the community. This does not happen in the academic centers. It does not happen in the hospitals. And it's interesting because the health authorities are very quick often to fund things right in the hospital, but they're very slow to fund innovation in the community. And it goes back to the other thing that I said earlier, is that most of healthcare happens outside of the hospital. It happens in the community. And so we need that bias. Like, we need to put that bias on the table and say, the experts are working in the community. They're out there. Those are the ones that are innovating and making innovation happen and making the results happen. And we need that to be looked at more seriously. And if there really is a bias to hospital care, we will pay $6,000 for a one-day procedure that has less efficacy than our whole program because it's done in a hospital. And so, we really have to be able to look at these things more logically, more transparently, and with removing that bias.
Yeah, I feel like you're through your work, you're challenging a lot of the sort of prevailing attitudes of how healthcare is delivered and how it should be delivered. And so, Val, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to jump in with words about access to psychedelics and ketamine being, off-label use for the treatment of mental health disorders. And, looking at us as a nonprofit society, trying to really create a robust system that really we're hoping is accessible to everyone. And looking at these, for-profit ketamine clinics kind of popping up everywhere, offering people some IV ketamine without the appropriate support. And then, the whole access of psilocybin, where we're looking at Health Canada really focusing on producers of synthetics, so that there's a drug identification number that can be associated with psilocybin, with some tinctures where, we're looking at Health Canada approving, an extract that has exactly that amount of psilocybin, versus the whole mushroom, which people are accessing. Thousands of people across the country are accessing whole mushrooms from sources that are obviously producing illegally. There's no access of the public to a safe supply of mushrooms, whole mushrooms. And this is what the Canadian public want to access. They don't want synthetic psilocybin, and they may not want extracts. They want something it's like cannabis, right? You can have extracts like Sativex or Navalone. They never take off, but people just want to have the coin, the plant material. And that's a plant medicine for thousands of years that have been used by Indigenous cultures all over the world for healing potential. But in Canada, we will never access whole mushrooms without a change in legislation. And that has to be really clear that even through our programming, now with the special access program, we are unable to access whole mushroom. We have to use either synthetic or extract for special access, and that for people looking for whole mushrooms for microdosing or whole mushrooms for healing ceremonies, it's not going to happen without legislation. Section 56 exemptions are closed down now, so that's where our standstill is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my understanding, and I think you guys have had more conversations with Health Canada than I have, but my understanding is they really don't know what they're doing, what they're going to do here. It's a bit of the field is taking off in such a way that's really outpacing the bureaucracy and the mechanisms they have, because you're breaking the rule. It's not just about the psilocybin or the ketamine. It's about the group and the therapy and the experience and the container and all these other pieces that really aren't, we don't really have the regulatory system set up for. So, we definitely, this is really a victim of the war on drugs and our sweeping drug policy under the table for decades and decades without really thinking about how we might approach this in a common sense and evidence-based way. So yeah, for sure.
Well, Scott, on that, and if anybody in policy or regulators are watching, this is, keep in mind, like, this happened in cannabis, right? Like, cannabis is a plant. People can grow cannabis. And, Health Canada really slowed down research around cannabis. It was very, very difficult. And then cannabis legalized. And so none of those clinical trials that could have been done got done.
Right.
And we're sitting in a situation that's very similar. Right now, people can get psilocybin mushrooms easily in the underground or in decriminalized cities like Vancouver. They can walk into a store and buy whatever they want at 5 to 7 places in Vancouver right now. And so the real question then is to Health Canada and to the health ministers is, who are we serving? We need to get good data out there. We need to get research out there, and they need to help that. And so if people are going to be consuming whole mushrooms out there, then we need them to accelerate how we can study it better, and not wait until, because we could find ourselves in another situation where we decriminate or it legalizes and we still don't have the research. Why not do the research? Let's get the research. It's not like a molecule locked in the lab, like a pharma drug that no one can get access to. I mean, right now, anyone can get access to it. And Health Canada should be serving the citizens of Canada and allowing the academics and the researchers and the physicians and the nurses and therapists to contribute to that in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'll do a plug for our next webinar, which is on July 20th. It's going to be about legal regulation, and we're going to talk a bit about all the sort of the things and the mechanisms and decisions around legal regulation of substances, including the fact that, if a substance is legally regulated, the government has a bit more space to actually talk about harm reduction and to educate people about use of the substance and increase the safety. Like right now, it's it's really that the government has thrown up its hands and allowed sort of things to go on without any regulation or control at all. And so we're definitely playing catch up around that area. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and see if you want to talk a bit about the training program, the certification program that's done through Vancouver Island University. So is that Pam to talk about, or who would want to talk about that?
Shannon, she's a driving. Shannon is amazing,
okay. Shannon,
and she's superwoman.
Okay.
I'll start. You can jump in. So what we've been, and I didn't really cover this in the beginning for what Roots to Thrive is, because Roots to Thrive is the service delivery component where we're kind of, on the front line of care, but it's a 3-prong approach, and the 3-prong approach has been, I'm actually on a government grant through the province to buy out some of my teaching time to do this. I have been for the last year and for the next few years, with the idea that we are basically developing a co-learning system with psychedelics. We're developing programming, and then we are studying it. And then we have developed an education program through VIU, which will start in the fall, where we are taking our learnings of what we're seeing in the research and what we're seeing on the front line. And we are starting to train people through an accredited graduate program. So the reason this is important is because we will never get the respect and the trust of the public if we do not treat psychedelic medicines like we would treat any other form of care delivery. And I say that with a bit of a cringe, because it is a highly colonial system that requires us to have those silly little letters after our name. And if we do not move in this system, we will not be able to get the government that is highly entrenched, and also as a safety mechanism, right? So this whole idea of a 2-eyed seeing approach, which is what the education system is built on, is really honoring that our Western ways, this research-informed practice, it's really important for safety, right? And from these Western ways of knowing, we know how to keep the physical body alive. And we also, we can help the physical body flourish in many ways as well. Where we really fall down is on the kind of our spiritual, energetic bodies. The Western system is totally, that's a sweeping statement, for the large part, fairly incompetent at dealing with those parts of self. So that the 2-eyed seeing approach, and this is where it's really imperative, and even considering the education system, is we do need standards of care. We need these to keep people safe. There's a lot of, when you're putting people's nervous systems down, their primary protective mechanisms, the potential for harm is great. And not just psychological harm, which, you know, the Western ways of knowing, we kind of understand psychological harm, but spiritual harm as well, right? Which we're a little bit more unfamiliar with. So it's this, the education program at VIU is really, what we're trying to do is really bring in both, so that we're honoring that, you know, the biomedical system and the research, and we're also bringing in other ways of knowing, so that we are seeing people as holistic beings, not just kind of biological beings in the world. So, and in speaking to the colonial part of this, we're also working with Indigenous members to really understand how we can work with even Indigenous elders, right? Like it really lands sideways in my body to expect an Indigenous elder who is highly adept at doing medicine-assisted therapies in their own cultural right to go and get letters after their name so that they can do it in their communities, which is like, blah. So we are also working on pathways to really honor that we do have a colonial system that we need to have standards of care in order for the government and the public to trust and to create a certain bar of safety. And we also need to look at other ways of knowing and how to honor that without continuing to colonize these other cultures, because again, many of them have been doing medicine-assisted therapy a lot longer than we have. So really kind of holding both very carefully. So I didn't talk a lot about the program, but I think that is, it's a year long. It's for working professionals. So it's a theory course per term so that people can work as well. And then there's a 90-hour kind of supervised practice where people are actually in practicum doing the work, so that by the time people graduate, you know, there's a relatively confident way that those letters do mean something out in the community and to our partners and to the public.
And prerequisite is a therapist or
yeah, so
like
thank you. And this is also a bit of a complex question because we are really trying to do this two-eyed approach. And thank you for putting that in the chat box, which is, it's kind of coming at healing in these, with these two perspectives. Our bar is, we are very carefully working with the bar. So at a very minimum, we are looking for a master's degree and mental health experience in therapy. We are not training people in very basic therapy mechanisms. We are expecting people to come to this program quite adept at working with mental health conditions. The program is building on top of an already established foundation. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's coming from the colonial ways that we're familiar. We are making, you know, there's an interview process and a pretty big vetting process so that we can also honor other ways of knowing in addition. So, and it's all cohort driven. So people are learning in small groups with a variety of disciplines, including Indigenous members, so that as we're moving, we're all kind of learning in this co-learning system rather than a bit of a top down. It's experts. We are experts sharing with experts and learning as we go. And then of course, you know, meeting consistent outcomes so that as people, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and this is a unique program in Canada.
It is. We are working with the University of Ottawa as well, who is also, we are meeting with them monthly to really try and align what we're doing. They're working on a master's program, which I think will launch next year. Ours is a graduate certificate program, 15 credits, which can, if people want to, they can take it into a master's program. But it's a lot more kind of practical on the line, on the front line learning. Yeah.
Cool. Anyone want to add anything to that great explanation of Shannon's? Okay. Any final words? I noticed that we're coming to the end of our time with you. We already had a request to bring you all back. So the reward for success is maybe appearing on another one of our webinars in the future to give us some updates on the program, if you're willing to do that. But anybody want to have some last words about Roots to Thrive and the amazing work you're doing?
Sure. I just I saw in the chat or the questions about where we hope to be in 5 or 10 years, and I think, you know, our hope is that we have our own facility where we don't have to work under the guises of other partners. We can offer everything that we hope to offer to the public, and we really want this to be publicly funded. I think this model is a model that really could be delivered in a financially sustainable way, and it has to be accessible to everyone. And so that's my hope for the future, is that we have a center of excellence, that we're able to have pilots everywhere across Canada that are providing the same program, or our program is informing grassroots programs in other jurisdictions, and that it's all publicly accessible.
Amazing.
I would second that, and just add on to that, one of the absolute privileges of working on the Roots to Thrive team is that all of us as practitioners get to show up and learn and lean in and become healthier. As a physician, I've never been happier or healthier working with this team. And I've never been in a space where you can show up so authentically and lean in and do your own work at the same time, so you continue to grow. And I wish this for everyone. So in the future, I would love to see these multidisciplinary, flat hierarchy, interdisciplinary folks coming together to create healing programs like this all across the world, where all ways of knowing can be brought in and honored and learning. And we're, as Shannon said many times, we're far from done. We're not perfect. We don't know the best way, but we're constantly leaning into those improvements. And so I really hope this for everyone. I would do this forever as a physician. And I think a lot of physicians, are going to come out or not want to retire now, and nurses and therapists, because if you have a chance to work on a team like Roots to Thrive, like, you show up in love and community and connection all the time. And that's a great way to live.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think we'll wrap up there. And so I want to thank you, our audience, for joining us tonight and for your generous support of MAPS Canada and Roots to Thrive. And I'd like to give my special thanks to Doctors Shannon Dames, Pamela Kriskow, and Valerie Masuda for participating, sharing their expertise and their heart and their wisdom, and just for working in the work you do. So I'll remind everybody, our next webinar in our drug policy advocacy series is going to be on Wednesday, July 20th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll be exploring the legal regulation of psychedelics. We have another group of great panelists from around the world who are going to talk about legally regulating stimulants and other kinds of drugs and what we've learned from that. MAPS Canada is a nonprofit charity. We rely on the donations of supporters continue to do our work. You can always make a donation to MAPS Canada through our website, where you can also find a link to our store for some clothing and other swag that supports us with each purchase. And you can also find their information about how to donate to the amazing and wonderful Roots to Thrive program, which we are proud to help support. So thank you, everyone, and good night.